I saw you made a post specifying, like clarifying the naming. It's PecanTree.
Yeah, PecanTree Oil Gas is the company.
Okay.
And then Pecan Estimate is the tool.
The tool. Got it.
And we recently branched out to make that its own website, just to make it a little more clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's the branding that we're doing.
The fun things of marketing and SEO and all of that shit.
Yeah.
And then like having a new domain, and then suddenly everybody's IT blocks our domain for everyone that tries to look at it.
Like whitelisted or
it takes a while for it to like
I think we're finally past that.
Yeah.
It's there's so much
to be trusted.
So many people don't know. It's like oh no, you just use email marketing. Oh yeah, well that is not just clicking buttons and automatically getting
especially with some of the IT departments that we've been having to work with, like some of our clients and stuff, that everything is locked down. So they have a whitelist.
I mean, like a lot of our clients are 80 years old.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason there's a lot of like security.
Sure.
With all this stuff.
They're the weakest link in the whole thing.
Yeah.
No, fun facts about marketing for all those startup and entrepreneurs out there, that things you should look at and think about when you start. Having different names or product names can start to become tricky. I think this is actually this is why I like just turning it on and starting, because this is actually a good way to intro. So today we're here with Jason and Tracy from PecanTree Oil and Gas. Thanks for coming on today, guys.
Of course.
Yeah.
Jason,
brave the elements.
Yeah.
They drove in from Austin this morning with their
thunderstorm that was chasing them.
Monsoon. Reach out 79, grab us.
Always fun in Texas when those flash floods pop up.
But probably thinking for a second this should have been remote.
Like, why are we doing this on a
I was like, I have good tech at home.
I think last time we came down to Houston, it was an ice storm. Like we drove down to
last year's NAPE was like treacherously trying to get to Houston with like trees falling down around us.
Nice.
Okay.
Houston's always fun to drive to. So.
Yeah.
Well, they say if you don't like the weather, just wait.
Wait
a day.
Yep.
And it'll be completely different. So
we're native Texans. We're used to it.
Well, thanks for coming on, y'all. So Jason, you are just get this out of the way, the CTO, the tech side. Tracy, you're the original kind of co-founder and the energy, oil and gas side, right?
Yeah, she's the smart one. So.
Hey, it takes both. Right? You got to have both. Knowledge without domain expertise on what you're trying to do doesn't really.
Yeah. And then I've seen some of the apps that reservoir engineers build, and they need a CTO. So.
I took it as far as like I probably passed where I should have, and I was like, I need someone who knows how to actually do this.
I mean, like I'm a data analytics guy. I'm like, I could build you a website, but you should not pay me to build a website.
True.
It would do my purposes, but I'm like, if I want people to actually use this as like a larger software, like we should probably
hand this off to us.
You don't want people to log into your Postgres database and just like run queries.
John and I know about that. Like a project he and I worked on, using AWS, and like someone from Kazakhstan or something was using our server because one of our contract developers
used
used
staging server. We hadn't even gone live yet. We're still developing.
I think he used the base, the default
he didn't
password,
change
all that.
The admin password. Shocker.
Oh wow.
And you're like, oh, good. Glad I'm paying you money. But AWS was kind enough to refund us that money. But someone spun up a bunch of super clusters and was mining Bitcoin with on our instance. I was like, oh, good. Thank y'all for coming in. Let's kind of just break down what do y'all do? What is PecanTree? And we'll kind of back out from there.
Yeah, so I spent 10 years in the industry as a reservoir engineer, reserves, worked as the reservoir reserves engineer for a public company. Felt like I'd have pretty good domain expertise on that side of it, like valuing things and picking which wells we're going to drill next, because it was a pretty small company where there were like 3, 4, 5 engineers max. And so I felt like I got pretty good at that, but just really didn't like the corporate life and just I've always wanted to start my own company and do my own thing. And, starting a family made me want to have more flexible hours.
Sure, 100%.
And so then it was like, well, what can I do without, being from money in the oil industry, not wanting to take out, massive loans to go buy wells or something. And so consulting was what it started off as. And I really thought that the mineral owners were people who were probably underserved. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized they really were underserved.
Yeah.
Making these massive decisions with like hardly any information.
I mean, the amount of people that I get texts, emails, or like, hey, my cousin or friend or brother, uncle got a letter and they're they know nothing. They're trying to figure it out. Who should I? And I mean, I forward business to people all that are not business, but just like, hey, got a friend that needs help.
Yeah.
Got another friend that's a landman. Check it out for him.
I mean, the first time I met someone in the minerals business, like on the side of buying, it seemed very predatory. Like the way he was explaining, I was like, okay, you see, you're just trying to get over on some people. Like, oh, here's $300,000, more money you've ever gotten in one lump sum, but what I'm taking from you is worth like 5x that. Like,
yeah. And that's like, you have these like $500,000 decisions, which for a lot of these companies aren't huge, right? But it's life changing for the person or for the family.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, you sold it for $500,000. That is excellent. That's great.
Yeah.
You should have sold it for $3 million.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh man. Or you shouldn't have sold it at all. Like if you just knew what you had and managed it. So the initial goal was just trying to provide that same knowledge and information to the other side.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I stepped off into it, I realized how difficult that actually was to do on a shoestring budget because, didn't have Aries, didn't have drilling info, didn't have like all the things that I was used to having at an operator that was
took it for granted. Yeah.
Yeah. And then people come to you with like, hey, I have this deed. And, I thought I knew like everything about how to find working interest and all things, all engineers think they know all the answers already. Right? And then I had a landman working with me at first, and I went to her, I was like, how do you know what they own? She's like, it's a thing.
About that.
No, I mean, my time at Grayson Mill's been eye-opening because I never had an insight into the land side of the world, really. And it's like, wow, this is complex and like, things are not well structured.
Yeah.
No, that's a bit another, like, just so, it's weird. I was born here. Neither of my parents were from here. Most Houstonians are transplants, which is one of the best parts of the city. But even growing up here, I spent most of my life in Memphis, but I had no oil and gas exposure. And so get in the industry, I end up getting my master's in energy business, learn a lot more about it. Been in it for almost 15 years now. And it's one of those things, the land side, unless you're in the industry, nobody has any idea how it works. One, two, how incredibly complex it is because you have different regulations for every state.
Legal precedents too.
There's all kinds of legal precedents. And then on top of that, that's just in the US where it's actually the hardest way to do it when you zoom out and then you look at everything internationally where it's like, oh, well, it's
the government owns it.
The government owns it. There's one owner. It's not hard to go figure it out. And it's like, oh, well, it would be a lot easier if we had something like that. But
when you think of all the knobs that change the value of a well, right? I mean, like, look, this has really good rock, but we only have 50% working interest, or just the way the puzzle pieces fit, and like this landowner. I mean, there's so many things that dictate why and where you drill this well. It's not just an engineering decision,
right?
There's, economic decision.
This is where we'll make the most money.
Yeah.
You have to hold leases and so on.
And then depth rights too. That gets real fun real quick.
And so I had a landman working with me full time for the first 2 or 3 months that the company was started. So we took on we had some ideas of where we could take it. Like, hey, if we know what things are worth, then we could sell things pretty easily. But so we took on a couple, like 2 jobs that were just like messes, like knowing what I know now, they were just messes. Then she found another job. So then suddenly I was like the only landman. And so I was like, teach me everything you know before you leave. So then I've been doing my own like land and title, like the hard stuff I'll call people for. But and just figuring out that everybody has so many complex questions, and then you're trying to answer it to people who they're doing this like on the weekend, they're retired, they have no like family reason, they have no real reason to learn this other than like it could be mailbox money, it could be nothing. So trying to figure out how to answer that economically for them without wasting their money,
right?
While also giving them a science-based answer rather than just like, oh, the landman says it's worth this much. I'm like, well, how do they know? Like,
can't run a decline curve. Right?
Yeah. So just it started like little piece by piece, like adding little bits at a time. Like, okay, well, I need to add in this thing. Okay, I have a client that needs this thing now. And growing to where, okay, well, the appraisals pay the bills. Those are the things like whenever people need like a tax related appraisal or estate like transaction, something, those things are easy to, it needs to be a full analysis. It's a normal thing to do. And so I can pay like charge normal amounts and people are expecting to pay normal amounts. So that's what has kept the lights on. But at least 3-4 times a week, I get a call from someone who can't afford that, doesn't need to pay for that.
Right.
They just need to answer questions. And so I started spending more and more of my time answering those questions and not charging.
Okay.
It's like, okay, well, that's not sustainable.
Right.
I need to come up with some like easy way that I can get these answers out, and something that would be really efficient. And so efficiency, like, I mean, it's just me doing it at this point. And so making it really efficient, putting everything into one database, having like systematized like things that I could just spit out, like put the client's name in, put their property in, have it all in one place. That was the only way to make it sustainable.
Yeah. So we stop there. I mean, this is you doing it.
Yeah.
Your brother's not in the picture yet.
Yeah.
So what does your stack look like at that point? Like, what are you using to like?
So I had Postgres running on I got like a gamer PC.
Okay.
Had Postgres running on it. And had like a PostGIS extension.
Nice. Yeah. PostGIS is
excellent.
Yeah.
Had used QGIS for my mapping
Okay.
because ArcMap was expensive.
Yeah.
And at that time, let's see, it was a lot of things that I would like map, like figure out how to do it in Excel, and then see if I could make a query to automate that, and then pull it back into Excel, and then like see how much more I could automate it.
Sure.
And so lots of scripts, lots of queries.
Again, people want to crap on Excel or even Spotfire, you know, in certain regards, but like I just see them as great prototyping tools.
Yeah.
Like I mean, like because like again, if you can hand off an Excel spreadsheet to Jason, like then I mean you can back out that logic into code. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And her first it's like her first database, like her first attempt at the model was actually really impressive when you start going through it. Like
that's
for
impressive
a
for your brother to say
it's not for a non-programmer, right? Like it was actually really neat how she had set everything up. You know, obviously it wasn't like the most perfect database, like, you know,
schema,
but like, you know, it got the job done, and there was a lot of automation behind it, and that was actually really impressive. So,
yeah, and I think,
and it was like fairly efficient too.
Yeah, and you know, I tried using PhDWin because they had their version that tied into SQL.
Yeah.
Ended up switching to Combo Curve, so that also could tie into the SQL, and trying to get everything like linked in together.
Yeah.
Yeah, just trying to use all the tools possible, like as much firepower as possible, but also keep it to where it would stay under the expenses.
Yeah.
It's all been self-funded at this point.
No,
so.
that's awesome. That's well, and that's there's those moments where you're like, hey, there's a gap here, right? There's a problem here that I have now figured out a way to solve. But then it's like, man, taking that from me running it on my computer for myself to being able to systematize that and automate it and scale it up and have an interface and all of this, like there's so much that has to happen in that.
I mean,
a lot of people just don't appreciate how hard and how much just like variety of skill and like knowledge that you have to learn. So like, hey, I know Python. Well, great. Okay. How are you going to set up the database? Well, I don't know anything about the database. Okay. I got to do that. But then you got to have the front end too. Like there's so much to it. So tell people a little bit about kind of how you navigated that being self-funded and kind of bootstrapped, because that is like, in my opinion, one of you have to be able to automate those things or you can't scale because it's just you when you're in those early stages. And so a lot of people run into that.
I wasted a lot of money in the beginning. Like that was because I was like, oh, you have to do it this way. You know, you got to spend money to make money. Like this is just expensive industry. And it wasn't until I just kept running into roadblocks. Like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, that's the next tier up.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to spend $10,000 on that, you know?
Yeah.
So mostly I think it's the same story of what everybody says. Like you Google a lot, you go to Stack Overflow.
Stack Overflow, yeah.
lots on there. I found a GIS. The GIS stuff has been the most transformative, I think, for my workflow.
Like the GIS Exchange, like there's some pretty good stuff on there. There's like, almost like
more of just like the idea of GIS.
Oh, just in general, yeah.
Yeah, like because being able to have my own map and like have it run quickly on a free like GIS software was amazing. And then I had it to where I can just draw on my like map. That this is how the website started, right? It was I could draw on my map on QGIS, and then it would spit out what the client's stuff was approximately worth, and I could scope things really easily.
Yeah.
And so all of the PostGIS tools and the things that like Postgres specifically worked really well with and played well with like distance from and within this anything that was location based. It's so important to transpose like what I'm doing as a reservoir engineer to code.
Right.
And so all the reserves calculations, like it was first figuring out how to get the reserves calculations into code. And then how do I apply that into a database? And I did that, but now it takes 3 hours to run the query.
I was going to say, that's another thing.
Right? Make it work.
Like, I feel like figuring out
fast.
indexes and like proper joins was at least half of the battle.
And in GIS, like spatial indexes are huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
it needs to be a geography index instead of a geometry. I'm like, well, that sped it up about 18 times. So because we're dealing with the whole nation and then figuring out what needs to be done ahead of time, what can be done on the fly. That was that, and then filling in the gaps with Python scripts. And then when I just needed to figure out this one thing, like, okay, I need to get a shapefile into my Postgres database. How do I do that? Like, because I wanted to get all the railroad commission, like data and shapefiles from here into the database. And so that was when I went to I found a blog of a guy who was doing some cool GIS stuff. I was like, I really like what you're doing. Could I pay you to help me just like hourly, like just to figure out this one solution? Yeah. And he wrote like, here's generally how the code should look. And then I was like, cool, I'll take it from there. You gave me enough, I can Google things now and kind of take it from there.
Yeah, no, that's people, and not enough people do that. I actually found the developer we currently use for our low code stuff from that exact thing, right? Yeah. Like we had a dev shop that I was not super happy with. And I was we were implementing Auth0 for our user management authentication stuff. And there was an Auth0 plugin for this no code platform that this guy had written, went to his website. He has a bunch of different stuff. He clearly knows what he's doing, has great reviews, reached out to him. Way cheaper, way faster, and like just a better overall experience, right? And it's like when you're bootstrapping, like don't sleep on just reaching out to people. Right? Like they might just send you the code for free and like, hey, or tell you a little tip that just like pushes you over that edge of unlocks that wall that you were running into, right? Like,
yeah. So like a lot of the Python scripts were like kind of the ETL like band-aids. And I was like, okay, eventually we can figure out but for right now, I'll just load in all the well headers this way and I'll load in all this stuff this way.
And how are y'all orchestrating them at that point? Or were you just running a monthly, just kind of like
all kind of manual at this, like as needed? Because honestly, like the API integration, any type of like automated thing, that was when it was starting to get out of my, like, okay, I spent all week working on this, or I could actually do client work and answer questions. And then figuring out another thing. So we live about a mile from each other.
Okay.
And this was kind of during the COVID times. Yeah. And we both have kids about the same age. Okay, and so he's over at my house all the time just because our kids play. Yeah. So I'd be like, hey, while you're here, I'm having issues with my Python environment is not loading the right things. Hey, can you like fix my environment variables?
Bobby and I have had that same conversation.
Hey, man, that's the worst part about Python is like getting people set up. I mean, I was talking to people because like, especially in the analytics side, there's R, and R is super easy to stand up. It's like you install R Studio and R and it works. Like Python, knowing how to use virtual environments and
I was trying like Anaconda, and I had like that plus a couple other things, and so it was using like a bunch of different.
Then it gets real mad.
It was really bad at me. I was like, please fix this.
And then you can use pip within Anaconda if they don't have the.
Exactly.
But that was like the worst part when I was trying to learn Python the first time was they also had that was when version 2 was switching to version 3. So like half of the tutorials were in version 2, half of version 3, and then one used Anaconda and Pip, and my head was spinning. I was like,
or it's like the libraries, the version's right, but then the libraries required from one of the other libraries is not updated, and you're like, or that's the worst part. As like a citizen coder, you're like, oh, I found this blog and it's got all the code, and you just go drop it in there.
Run it. You're like, why isn't it working?
And then you spend the next however many hours that your resilience is trying to debug the code, not realizing that it's just your stupid environment isn't set up.
Or like, oh, I had it in the folder below where it wanted it to be.
Exactly.
Darn it.
There's that too.
Yeah, the directories for sure.
Yeah.
So I watched your video, and I think that's it was just outside looking at it. It was a great video. I assume it got a lot of traction because of just looking at the engagement specs, like the comments and likes and stuff on it.
This is the video about Pecan Estimates.
Yeah, but I think it has a lot of good information that I want y'all to kind of hit on. One, in the video you talk about, someone approached you and asked you how much the estimate would be, and you were said it was like a couple $1,000s, and they're like, well, the deal's only worth I'm only being offered a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just that concept, I think is a good thing to highlight, right? Because there are a ton of, whether they're just average people that, great grandparents had these minerals and now they have them, or, there's so many people in this industry that randomly buy minerals and just have stuff, right? They're non-op. It's just, they have it. And you get enough of that and then it's hard to keep track of, or if that's just like your side thing, whatever. I think there's a really, all this to say, it's really interesting gap in the market for that, and I love that you guys are trying to solve that problem. I also loved the like scorecard that you generate as the output, because it's good enough for engineers, but it's also good enough for the average person, right? Like it has all the data, but it's not so complicated that you don't have to be a reservoir engineer to understand what the hell you're talking about.
Of course, both sides still want it like either more technical or more simple. But
Bobby and I are intimately
it's a very
with
wide range of clients that we're trying to service with this. But creating that Zillow idea where you could because when I think about I'm not from the industry initially, our family is tech, we're from Austin, our dad worked for IBM, like tech is familiar with me, and I even had a tablet PC blog back in college, back when that was a thing. But when I started my first internship, I was out in the field and I was like, y'all could tell me that this well made 1 barrel a day or 1 million barrels a day. I would have no idea if that was true or not. And I think back to that same thing happens where I got this offer and I don't know if this acreage is worth $1, a penny an acre, $1 million an acre. What are we even talking about? And it took me a while to realize that my, 80% answer, or even 20% answer, hey, I don't know a lot about this right now, but that amount is worth something. It's more than they know. And that's worth something. And trying to figure out how to dispense that in a responsible manner that I wouldn't be giving bad advice, inappropriate,
because saw with Zillow, they had that issue where all of a sudden their algorithm was it caused issues. So there is some exposure.
They also got bit because they started buying houses. That would be the equivalent of her giving an estimate and then buying it.
And that's been a whole thing also, because the industry really likes to have the people who are doing the appraisals also be the ones that are the buyers,
or you're getting some sort of commission out of it, or some sort of percentage or something
like real appraisals.
Like a fiduciary is what where you guys have invested in being
to do a real appraisal, according to the U.S. appraisal standards, you cannot have the value tied to your commission. It can be 0% tied to how much you make on that job.
Gotcha.
And so even things where you're protesting your tax appraisal, if they get a commission of the amount that they reduce it, that's actually not allowed by appraisal standards, because you're reviewing an appraisal. You're doing an appraisal review, which is just actually an appraisal. And you're supposed to use the same appraisal standards, but it's also one of those where if you're not a certified appraiser, what are you going to lose? You're not going to lose your license because it's not even a licensed thing for most people. So
it's interesting because I fight my property taxes every year. And so it's fascinating to think about that and that aspect.
But it's one of those things that it's done all the time. That doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it. And I found that the mineral space is almost one of the worst ones I've seen, where it's just that's just how we do it. I'm like, that's terrible. I don't want to do that.
It makes a ton of sense.
But Yeah. So we got to the point where I had this like kind of quick look is what I had initially called it. I was like, I'll take a quick look at it. I'll give you my like short answer. I had like my models that could give me like spit out quick answers. And I had a template and idea of a way to roll it out to be more useful. I was like, I'm sitting on a whole bunch of value. There's a lot of people who would appreciate this, but I don't know how to get it out there.
Right.
And that was the biggest hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
So then I think it was like 2 years ago, I went to him and I was like, I have this idea. I need help with it though, like, because it's a big idea and it's more than I can just do on my own. And so, would you be wanting to help with this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we spent the next year trying to figure out how to
how to make
that happen.
Sure,
Yeah.
So what were you doing at that time?
At that point, first originally I have like a background in startups. So my first company was at a startup. And so kind of what we're doing right now is kind of like in my wheelhouse. So I was able to help her. So before we even got to that, like, I helped her kind of like set up a lot of her like consulting pieces, like Sweet Dash is
all
like
the CRM stuff.
All the CRM stuff, getting customers through and stuff like that. And set up all that automation. And so that's what we did a little bit initially to kind of get that through. And then at that point, I was working as an architect at a software company in Austin and stuff like that. And obviously it was COVID time. And, we were all remote and, you have a little bit of time to like start looking at things. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I think, tell me a little bit more about your industry. Tell me about like what you're trying to do, like the problems that you're trying to solve, kind of like what we were just talking about. And it just sounded really interesting to me. I think the thing that caught me was like, she's like, it's like having a stock and not knowing, like someone's trying to buy that stock from you.
Right.
And you don't know what it's worth, but you also don't know how much of that stock you have. And you also don't know like what actual stock like you actually have. So
no,
like,
that's
real value. Like,
a really good analogy. It would be like having a stock, not knowing how much you have and not having an exchange to go see how much it was
and
valued at. That's exactly kind of what I thought when I watched the video is it's like there isn't a way for the average person or anybody in the public to just go and have that like Zillow value estimate for minerals. And it's like, that makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of what you guys are, and
so that was a really compelling story to me. And I really liked, like, especially like, having a flat fee for figuring stuff out. And then, like, how can we automate this to make it more efficient so we can get a low price out?
Yeah. When you hit it on the head too, a minute ago, when you were talking about how like, this is a really interesting problem. That's exactly why Digital Wildcatters exist. That's why we started this podcast, is because we know that there are all these oil and gas problems that are fascinating and in most cases fairly solvable with technology. We just need the help of the guys that know technology to help, fuse that basically. And so we're trying to highlight these problems and show how interesting they are and, talk about, hey, it's not just, hitting stuff in the field and pipes and oil, right? Like there's all this tech and all these problems that could be very impactful problems that could be solved relatively easy with
and lucrative. I mean, like some too. I mean, like
opportunity.
Again, people like in tech think about how lucrative tech is, but they don't think energy. The demand for energy is growing a ton, and
you want to be in a stable industry. Maybe not oil and gas specifically, but energy is not going anywhere. That was like I'm a mechanical engineer. I started in the energy space doing wind turbine blade manufacturing, and I realized, everybody and everything needs energy, and energy is not going away because humans keep repopulating. And so it's like, okay, energy makes a lot of sense. But again, a lot of people don't. Our industry, the oil and gas industry, is horrible about talking about these problems or having any kind of public presence unless it's, it's always reactionary, right? It's either pretty corporate, here's the stage picture by the logo in front of the office, or it's, we're sorry that there was the spill and here's the reasons why it happened and why it wasn't our fault.
Right.
And so that's, I think there are just so many problems and so much opportunity there, like that are easily solved with technology. And there's just this gap there that we would love to help fill. I'm glad you guys are doing that.
Yeah. And so, I was, I had that background in startups. And then also at the time, like I said, I was working as a cloud architect. We were on Azure at the time. And I was like, like, we could make a website pretty easily, and we could probably, service a lot more people, automate, like maybe build your PDFs, the quick looks out as PDFs or something to that effect. There's lots of ways to build PDFs nowadays, like automation and stuff. So, and so we just talked about it more, and it just made a lot of sense. At that point, I was at a good point in my career. And, I was like, yeah, let's try this out. So
let's unpack that.
Yeah.
So you come in.
Well, and also I want to get to it. I don't think we asked. Big brother, little brother?
Big brother.
Big brother. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you do have we talked about this before we started, but your background is from the computer science side,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We were, for everybody listening, I was talking about how I don't think we've had a computer science degree person on the show yet. And so I'm glad we can have you as the first one.
Box ticked. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's honestly what I wanted, right? We wanted this overlap of SMEs from the industry as well as the tech side that are, working on these same problems.
Because these things do have to be hardened. Like I think we did
absolutely
earlier.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
well, they have to be hardened, but also, I've talked about this a lot. You have just having a different perspective from a different industry that does things a different way completely changes how things happen.
Yeah.
And that was a big, that was definitely a big change jumping over, because I was originally in the financial space, and that has its own stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when I came over here, I was like, okay, so how do people know what they own? And she's like, well, kind of like, I was like, is there a central database that we can pull this from? Is there
if only.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, all right, maybe we could just scrape the PDFs. And it's like, well, all the PDFs are like different compared, for each year, and also like the counties. And there's you have to go to the county to grab the data.
He's like, well, county data, that's free, right? I was like, well,
no. Exactly.
It kind of is if you go to the courthouse, but all the online stuff costs like $1 a page. And
yeah, I was like, there's no GitHub, like no open source project of people just submitting their stuff. We should start something like that. But yeah, exactly. So it's like, it was an interesting learning experience. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, we should do it on blockchain too. So there's always there's lots.
Yeah.
True.
Even people are running into it now. I mean, even like obviously got all the LLMs. Like, oh, well, I can run my DOT, or like, no, you can't, because it's like 500 pages, and that would cost you way too much money to run that through.
Exactly.
I don't know. I've got like 4 or 5 tabs open right now. They're all different write-ups of feeding how to get the language models to analyze your.
You can get them to analyze it. It's just, they're too expensive right now. It's like
Yeah.
And the cursive is too awful from especially older.
Well, that's what. So that was. I was actually going to bring that up. When I first moved down here, right after getting out of the field and getting my first kind of sales office engineering job, my roommate, he had just graduated from law school, had just taken while we lived together, he took the bar, and he was waiting for his bar results, but he was a landman, and I remember the first day of his internship or the job when we were working together. It's like, yeah, I started, I asked him how it was. He's like, well, I started at, whatever it was, 1897 and got up to whatever year. It's like, it's a really random year. Why that year? And he's like, oh, well, that's when they started using the typewriter. And then it just completely blew my mind. I'm like, oh shit, there's probably 200 years before that of just handwritten documents.
Yeah.
Right.
And and it's like, and he tells me all the time, he's like, yeah, people's names, like initials, abbreviations, all this stuff has been handwritten for centuries almost, and it gets messed up, and it's not digital.
I spent about a month when I was still in like the learning phase of figuring out what people needed. Was someone in Utah needed an appraisal, and there was there's a lot of the counties in Utah for some reason have you like remote into their local computer using a remote software.
Interesting.
And that's how you search their index, and all the index were like handwritten. And so I probably spent a week just like looking through looking for certain names. Like, okay, well, there's because you couldn't search like for that name. You just had to find where. I was like, wow, this is. Can you imagine expecting like a mineral owner to do that? Just for fun.
They wouldn't. I mean, like, and then it's like, oh, like I said, $300,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And unless you know someone in the industry or know someone who knows someone in the industry, like, what do you do? You don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
And even me being in the industry, like I don't know people like, well, I have like 3 contacts. Like I know one other person who kind of does what I do. Like I barely have contacts to give people when they're like, hey, do you have a referral? I'm like, I could probably find one. And I'm like immersed in it.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's true too, right?
Yeah.
It's like I can refer someone my landman buddies who can look at, the terms and the conditions of the contract, but that doesn't mean that they have any idea on what the actual value of those things are, right? They're not doing simulations and decline curves on any of that stuff.
Right.
Okay, so I think it seems like at this point, Tracy's got a bunch of badass Python scripts and a Postgres database and some QGIS, like
3,000 line query.
Yeah.
So
just 3,000? Yeah.
I pared it down before you came on.
This is really good because y'all are also siblings.
It was wonderful. I came on. She had one script. It was called All the Things.
All the Things.
It's like kitchen sink are us, right? So
that's awesome.
That's
that's pretty awesome. I like it. I appreciate the effort.
So
I had some comments in there saying what some of them did.
Yeah.
They were mostly updated.
Hey, the fact that you had comments is a good start. Especially
not just that. She had like version 1 of that, version 2, version 3.
Of course. And they were saved as just SQL queries.
Commenting out your old versions just in case isn't a bad idea.
Well, I had a bad experience with GitHub when I was in grad school because I did my simulator in grad school in C++, and I was like, I want to make sure this thing is safe. So I had him show me how to like sync it onto GitHub. Somehow, we still have not figured out how. I managed, I got the final thing working. I submitted it, and I was like, I'm going to take this and run with it. And I somehow synced it and wiped out the last 3 days of work. And I was like, I hate GitHub.
But also somehow she deleted the history too. Because I was like, all right, let's go back to the history. We'll just restore it. No, I was like, how did you? The repo's there. It should be there. I didn't quite.
I was a little hesitant to put all my work that I was doing day to day on GitHub. But
that was wild. I'd never seen
I'm now adopted into it. So.
But that was 2010 or 2008 or whatever it was.
Yeah, I guess my grad degree was 2013, 14.
Oh yeah,
and I did want to get back in it because it's interesting going to USC, which people don't even realize that they do or did have a petroleum program, but and it sounded like there was was it Smart Oilfield or something?
Smart
like that?
Oilfield technology was the focus that I did there. I was working at Chevron at the time.
Okay.
And they had a collaboration with USC's researchers to do, we were doing neural networks and fuzzy logic, machine learning on artificial lift. And so I was the SME I was the production engineer on a field that had, it was their, the field that they did all the tests with because it was fully automated. It was back in 2008. And, it was really cheap to do tests there. So they did all the fun stuff there.
Is that some of the stuff in California?
It was actually Midland. It was McElroy Field in Crane County. They
that legacy vertical.
Yeah, water flood since the 20s type of thing. One of those.
Yeah, assets all paid off. And it's making money. You guys can go play around a little bit.
Doing a workover, you're like, oh, this was nitroed. Okay.
No pressure.
Yeah, we got to plug this well, and it just keeps taking this and that. All right, can we fit a car down there? Yeah, there was a lot of interesting engineering questions. But yeah, we had a bunch of rod pumps, and so we were trying to predict failures. And so I was the SME on that project, and so I was working with the researchers.
Used a lot of pump cards doing that.
Yeah, a lot of pump cards and trying to send all the pump cards into the machine learning and working with the pumpers to figure out
that was one of the first things I did in my first oilfield internship was right around with the pumpers and help them upgrade their echo meters from the analog version to the digital version and set up the polish rod transducer with the pump cards and all that stuff. Fascinating. I had no idea how much info you could get just out of the well, the pump, wellhead itself, right?
Yeah, and then trying to explain to these computer science guys in California, hey, this is what we're doing. Yeah. And they're trying to explain to me what they're doing, here's the window that we're using to take the average, and then there's a paper on it, they've done a couple papers on it, explaining it, but through that collaboration, they're like, hey, we offer a grad degree, and Chevron pays 70%, we'll pay the other 30%. And I was like, done.
Yeah, 100%.
So. And then because my undergrad was at UT and their program's awesome, and so I was like, I want something slightly different. And USC's computer science was awesome that I was working with, and so I got to take several fuzzy logic and sensors and networks and those type of classes.
That's awesome.
That was really fun.
I wish I had a badass fuzzy logic script instead of the one in Excel. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
That was also before things got really fun with that. So it was when
before the Excel plugin.
There
actually, I'm pretty sure the Excel plugin was a grad student project.
Probably.
Oh, really?
May have been the one you were working on. Actually, because I've used it. What was it? I originally used it when we were working together doing well name.
Matching well names.
Before
wow.
I came into a company that had been around for about a decade at that point, and they were implementing a new CRM ERP system and stuff, and but they weren't using any kind of
unique
there was
identifier.
No unique well identifier.
It was a service company, so they're not thinking in terms of an API number, which we could go down a rabbit hole.
But like
whole
rabbit hole. But they were just the guy. The field tech that is doing the install calls up the supervisor, and he tells them, it's the
or he saw it
the
on
Smith
the
one,
Smith
number
or he saw
one.
it on the sign, but he got
the Joe Smith
write
number
the full
one.
thing out, or
XW
dash
abbreviated well name, and
J Smith number
I did a lot of work with that fuzzy logic plugin in Excel, which is actually pretty useful. But I'm pretty sure it was like a research project. I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Okay, so you swoop in
then
so how are we taking what she's done, all the things, how are we getting all the things into like, an actual application?
So the I guess what was the first thing that we did?
First thing was moving off of my PC.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right, because
it was like a gaming tower.
Funny
enough,
I still have but all my videos and stuff are on the gaming tower. But
nice.
it made it a little difficult for us to both work together.
Yeah, we couldn't really collaborate. So moving all of her stuff onto GitHub. And then also moving, the database to AWS at the moment.
Nice.
Postgres and stuff.
Is that RDS? Or
RDS at the moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we just quite literally just picked up and just took it.
And that's one thing I've never done it. I've used Postgres on AWS, but can you do, obviously you can do PostGIS on RDS?
Yeah, that was, so I looked at a lot of different database types, like Planet Scale was one of them. At that point, they weren't doing they didn't have the GIS plugin and stuff like that, because that was one of the ones I really wanted to use. So we were like, okay, let's just drop it at AWS and we'll just go from there. Whenever we need to scale out, or if we can just keep the geography stuff there, and we'll do everything else at Planet Scale or some other service provider. We'll do that and stuff. So, so RDS at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
you moved the database there, but then did y'all? I mean, because obviously you've built a full application there now too. Correct?
So we moved over there. We connected to Well Database, and
because that's what you're using for your public data,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good guys. We had John and them on a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what public source or how you were getting your
initially it was drilling info, and then we just wanted something a little more independent to fit our tech and our philosophy.
I know another company or two that are in a similar spot as y'all, doing different kinds of work, but similar, where they need the public data, and John and them have been helping on that side too.
Yeah. And we also overlay that with other data that we pull in. Kind of just let's cross-reference it or
it shortcutted a lot of things where we could just fill the gaps easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, it's one of those things too where it's the person that doesn't know it's like, oh yeah, it's public data, just go get it.
He's like, well, we could just get our own data, right? I was like, even just Oklahoma makes me not want to do it.
The fact that every state has its own.
In Texas, you have to allocate them,
and then you've got allocation, and then each state has their own requirements too, right? You're not getting the same fields from every state. They're definitely not named the same.
Yeah,
that's why there are companies for it.
Right. I'd rather focus on what we're good at and let's pay someone.
No, that's. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of that, and I don't think. I think that's a trap that a lot of startups can fall into. Is it's like, oh well, we could build our own scrapers to pull in all this data, but what we're actually trying to do isn't. That's just a means to the end of what we're actually trying to do. So we don't need to focus on that if it already exists.
And you just have to go into it knowing that anywhere you're getting public data, there's going to be junk that you're going to have to clean up, and you find ways around it and find cleanup scripts and
And that kind of feeds into also like how our philosophy for doing startups, like a tech startup right now, is do what you're good at. Yep. And focus on that IP, because that's what's making you money, and everything else. We're at a weird point in tech where it's almost like that Spotify model where people are just trying to vacuum up as many users as possible. So they're giving you have all these services, not just AWS. AWS is one layer, but you have all these auxiliary services like for Cell or like I said, like Planet-Scale and stuff like that, that they're just trying to vacuum up users and they're just built on top of AWS. And they offer like, they have a free tier and it's extremely, generous free tier. You can kind of scale pretty far as a startup.
And they do first paid tier is way too expensive. And at that point, you're already locked in, and you're like, I guess this is what we're gonna do. It's almost like they want it to be like that.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. But like at that point, it's one of those things like you can get up and going as a startup, and if you hit that first tier, then you're making money. You at least
there's a reason you got there, right?
Yeah, you at least you
unless
have
you're
something.
really bad at you're doing your infrastructure. No, I mean like and again, I think there's some FUD for people like with the cloud because like they just don't know what they don't know, and they've been burned because they left the server on too long. They're like, well, this is too expensive. I can't do this. But like if you architect it right, and it's built for the scale, once that scaling happens, that meant you brought on, like if I'm going well past the 1 million lambdas in a month, like that's a good thing probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's like I tried to go to the cloud with like putting my Postgres database on Azure. Yeah. Accidentally had a setting, like I guess they didn't have like a throttle setting. Okay. And the first month it was like $400. Yeah. And I wasn't even using it. Nope. And now like I think we're like full scale, like everything's in there, and we're spending maybe 300.
Yeah, maybe 300.
Like I'm like, okay, that's what someone who knows how to use it correctly versus someone who's trying to just get by.
Yeah, and that's always my thing, just in general, whether it's on-prem or whatever. Like you have to know the technology you're using, and understand the levers that you have to use it effectively. Yeah. I mean, like both can work.
It's also part of just being a startup too, right? Where it's like, hey, yes, I can do this myself, but today, I need it today. Yeah. And this covers all the hard shit that I would have to learn if I was doing it myself. And at some point in the future, maybe we can do it ourselves, but I need it now. And this, as long as it's economic, right? Like, this is worth paying for today so that we can keep moving forward and make money.
Like I told you, I spent my previous job was as a cloud architect at Azure, right? So I basically spent 3 years as a YAML programmer, right? Like that's I was
code,
writing build scripts and writing like infrastructure, and that's definitely a trap. I think startups can kind of fall down when they're trying to save money, and they're like, all right, well, I don't want to go to these like third party companies. Like right now we're hosted at Railway, and Railway is really neat because all you need to do is just like, hey, here's my GitHub database. And you just point to it and you say, I want to deploy. And they will spin up a Docker instance, and they'll figure out what your language is, and they'll do all the infrastructure pieces for you. Yeah, they'll do all the infrastructure pieces for you. You can even make it so that it scales up at a certain, like all the hard stuff, all the stuff that I was doing at my old job.
It's just codified.
It's just codified. Yeah, exactly.
$5 a month too.
Yeah, it's
what is this tool again?
It's a company called Railway. So like railway.app.
Okay.
It was. Yeah. So like so there's a whole bunch of different and you can also like spin up, like that's where we're doing our Redis database. So you're like, I just want to add a Redis service, and it automatically adds it, and it does the the sharing of like all the environmental variables to all the other
services. If I could stop you there real quick. Well, no, just because like sometimes when new technologies come up that like we haven't been brought up here, can you talk real quick just for the lay people what Redis is?
Oh, sure, yeah. It's a very fast it's a very fast database that is like a key value pair.
Yeah, so it's in-memory caching layer, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like you can, it's mostly used as a cache. You could use it as like a normal database, but like almost it's too expensive to really do that. Like you'd rather just use it as a caching layer, and like you can't really do joins or anything like that. It's just like key value pairs and stuff. So it's mostly used as like
our site's so fast because we use really like heavily lean into that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
He's really utilized.
Well, because I'm assuming, a lot of this is probably, again, you're using database, like data comes in, monthly, or there's some different months published on different times, but like you're probably only running like certain processes a handful of times a month, but then if you can cache that and people never even go back to the database,
that's
the database is doing cheaper because it's not getting
the property
hammered.
data, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like we have like an ETL process from Oil Database that turns it into like basically our model, and then we build our estimates based off that model. So like you may have a model for like Texas, or like we have these little grids essentially, which I think you can see on our map a little bit.
Yeah, if you like zoom in on the map, you'll see like these hexagons.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's the foundation. That's what all the heavy lifting calculations are built on.
Okay.
And then his stuff comes in, like the Java, all the real programming comes in and customizes it to the shape that's being drawn on it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's all the additional calculations based on like the shape that's overlaid at the top of it and stuff like that, and all the units that are overlaying that and stuff. So there's like a lot of other pieces, but
So with and share as much or as little detail as you're comfortable sharing. There's
fine.
no right or wrong answer here, but what kind of like pre-built stuff were you able to use, libraries, even tools like you're talking about, versus some of the stuff that you did have to kind of build from scratch, or whether it's actually before that, talk about kind of just like the flow. So like the data comes in from Well Data Lab or Well Database, and then what's it pulling in? How is it doing decline? Some general analysis, like how is it backing out the information that you guys end up providing?
So initially the data is coming in. We have a connection to their Snowflake instance right now. Like originally we were pulling through the API, and we're just pulling a ton of data, right? Because we need all the
whole US. We're like the perfect
just do the
use case.
file.
Yeah,
it's
like because I was helping one of those other companies
sync,
with
right?
that, where John and them were providing. I think John and them were providing a monthly dump, and then you have to do Azure or AWS step functions to get it. But then it was like once and that's why I like Snowflake for the data sharing. It makes it super easy to share across.
Yeah.
And I could see it a lot easier too, and tell him what I needed then, because the API was a little difficult because he knew most of it, but I'm like, oh no, that one ties to this one, and
Well, and even like with APIs, right? Like I run into this, and it drives you crazy when you finally realize that's what the problem is. But it's like some APIs, if there's a null value, they won't return the field, and then it's like, well, shit. There is a field here, and there's values in that field, but
we were running into a lot of issues trying to get the API hooked up. So we were doing manual loads for a long time until we hooked up with it.
Because we were just pulling so much data. Right? So
survival mode too.
Survival mode too. It's like, all right, well, let's focus on what makes us money, right? So we were pulling in the data. So we pull in the data from Snowflake. We have like some staging tables, and then we populate our main tables based on that, and we run basically like pushing that through an ETL process, and then kind of through the next step of that is the model, building the model and stuff like that. I guess you can talk about that. So
that's where so a lot, like I've had some people think that I'm trying to like replace Combo Curve or trying to replace a data service.
There's always a weird I'm like, oh great, another decline curve coming. But that's not it. And then it depends on who you serve.
And no, I actually use I use Combo Curve and I use like data services because so then the next step is once it comes in and we have all the well headers, then it lines up with what have we run through Combo Curve already, and then what reservoirs have been mapped on that area. Pulling it together, getting like the for each grid, the PDP, PUD, PROD, POS, like reserves, categorization, and which reservoirs that's being tied to, running it through the risk profiles and the current like pricing things, and then layering on any assumptions to fill in the gaps. Like
so all that work's being done in Combo Curve?
No,
or some of that.
The type curves are being done in Combo Curve, and then the well declines. We have about 200,000 wells in Combo Curve right now declined.
We have an automatic connection to Combo Curve where we push data in. They set up a database in AWS for us where we push it in and then we pull back out and stuff like that. So it's all automated.
That tied in really well. And then once the type curves and the economics for each type curve, and then the well economics, then it's all pushed back to the database, and then the all the things query takes over.
I love that so much.
Does all the like we have our own kind of proprietary multiples, like for any well that's not declined. Like
No, if GPT didn't code for me, I would have the most ridiculous functioning as well. So I appreciate that.
Right.
So as on the user side, is this this isn't like an instant report, right? There's still an analysis time frame, or there is an instant report.
Like what, 30 seconds?
30, 40 seconds.
Yeah,
or so.
It's pretty instant at this point.
So you have completely automated.
Yeah.
That's
awesome. So we pull
really cool.
all the data in, and we get to that point which you just mentioned in the model. And then on the user side, I'll go into the website in a sec, but like basically they're drawing their shapes.
Right. So I'm coming on and drawing a circle around.
You're drawing a circle around in like Midland or something like that. Yep. And then we basically say, hey, okay, we do a whole bunch of calculations based on like what wells are in there, what overlaps of units there are, and figure out all the calculations of the percentages and figure out like what percentages that you would have interest in each of the wells and go from there and stuff like that. So
what hexagonal grids is that intersecting? What reservoirs? like grid reservoirs. That we have lots of random names.
Here's something. I mean, 'cause I feel like I've seen this, and even like I think Josh Groves is doing some stuff, and it's like, what's the deal with the hexagonal grids? Is there something like to that?
There like a specific library.
There's
there's
you could say like create grid and make it hexagonal, and there's so many box like square grids in the land side. Originally, this is all based on the land grid until I got to East Texas, and I was like, okay, let's make a pseudo grid. And so then it was like, well, a hexagonal grid would make it obvious that this was not the land grid that I'm looking at right now.
Okay, got it.
Y'all both agreed, but I'm the least familiar with this space. Why is East Texas
meets and bounds?
A groan?
Yeah, there's just, I mean, because like say we're in North Dakota at Tracy Mill, like everything's Jeffersonian, and it's all rectangular and squares, and it all just kind of like, but, you know, you get into Texas, and like she said, meets and bounds, and it's just things aren't drawn.
Yeah, my husband's a land surveyor for a Texas land surveyor, so I always like groan about all these land surveyors making these stupid like 3-page long descriptions of what something is. But
you like shapes that are just kind of random, really.
Yeah,
and it was really interesting too, because like, you know, halfway through last year, we were doing it with the land grid, and so like we would get to the point where like we create the model, and then we would take it to the next step, and we'd be like, you know, fill in the land grid with all the values that we expect that land to have. And you'd be like, all right, well, now you have a percentage of this particular land and stuff. But the math was so hard. And so we offloaded that to database, but it wasn't like dynamic. And so halfway through last year, we were like, all right, this isn't working for us, especially like in East Texas or other states and stuff like that. So let's standardize it on some sort of like mile by mile hexagonal piece. And then if we do that, we can cut out all this ETL stuff of like building some of the model, and we can do that on the fly whenever someone draws.
Right.
Yeah. And that, like, I think that sped up our times quite a bit.
Probably saved you quite a bit of money.
Yeah, because instead of having to calculate the entire U.S. at once, every time, we can get most of the way there for the whole U.S. and then do the fine tuning of the calculations just on demand.
Yeah.
And so that one makes it so if you go to our site and you were to say, yes, I want the Pecan estimate for this property, we'll say like, hey, it's generating, check back in a minute. And it's usually there in a minute.
And one of the neat things with going to that hexagonal grid, if like, you know, permits update the value, right? So like if we get a permit from Well Database, then all we have to do is update that grid and like the surrounding grids within a certain range. We don't have to rerun the entire like US or like the entire state or stuff like that. So
nice. I'm assuming most people don't have this, but if someone has like their own shape file or something of their acreage, can they load that into the platform and run it on that?
As of
now we can.
2 weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, that's another good point. So like last year we were, you know, mostly rebuilding the model from scratch, because that's what we spent like the summer doing.
Yeah. Well, that was with meat and potatoes, right?
Yeah, exactly. The important stuff, right?
That's also another point, right? Like a lot of developers and just engineers in general, like they want it to be perfect before they deploy into the world, and perfection is the enemy of
I mean, we've definitely struggled with that.
Yeah. So it's a very hard like balance. Yeah. But like even to what you're talking about, like rewriting the whole thing, like that is a very normal thing in a software company.
Yeah.
But as a first time person, you're like, man, if I do it this way, yes, it's faster and we can do it today, but I know that I'm gonna have to do. But that's
pay that
that's
debt
okay
at some point,
right? Like at that point, you should have money coming in, and if you don't, maybe it's not a good idea. Like,
and we had a lot of like debate back and forth too, and so we had that original idea for the model, and we had built a PDF generator where we could, you put in a shape, and it would generate a PDF based on like that original model and stuff like that, and it was really neat. And we showed it off at a show, and people were like, "Cool," but that's not quite what what we need.
Wasn't quite the right, like we've changed a lot of what the actual product looks like, because a lot of clients, they just want to report, and a PDF has been the easiest like thing to hand to people. And so when I told him, I was like, we need PDFs, he's like, not a website? Like, are you sure? I was like, let's just go with it. So we had that model, and we were rebuilding it, and we said, all right, well, this isn't quite what people need. And so we debated for a long time, because, that we didn't want to rewrite it, because something was working. We could make money off of it. It could be fine, but it wasn't what we needed at the time. So we decided to, go ahead and rewrite it. Ended up better for obviously, we can generate models on the fly. And we took a lot of the code out of SQL and out of these like massive scripts, and we're able to put in code and stuff like that, which is always better. But but the website itself, I think
we started that in October.
Yeah.
I think the October show was the first time I was like, hey, I have this cool, like I have the map up. You want to show it off to people? But like there wasn't like a whole lot to it. Like you couldn't sign up or anything like that. So
oh, that's awesome.
So
what are y'all using any? So I'm just gonna ask because I've used it before and I was impressed with it. Have you ever messed with like Kepler for any of the mapping stuff or looked at any of those Mapbox or any of that?
So
stuff?
right now we're using Mapbox,
Okay.
and I've been really impressed with Mapbox.
Yeah, Mapbox.
I was
great
like,
documentation.
Yeah, that was kind of the big one.
Implementation.
Yeah, that was kind of the big one. Is that Mapbox handles so many pieces, and it's like fairly like
It's cheap. It's easy.
Yeah, they split off, and there's OpenMap, which I was thinking about doing, but there's just so many plugins for Mapbox, and there's not everything just kind of works out of the box for OpenMap or Open whatever that one is. Yeah. The open source version when they split off and stuff. So yeah, we're using Mapbox for all of our maps. I was kind of worried that it wouldn't be fast enough, but yeah, it's like super fast. It loads everything really nicely. So it's really clean too. So.
Nice. No, Kepler was one that I found. I was doing some. I was trying to show. I wrote a blog showing people. Bobby and I worked for a gauge company, and we did all these well tests for different operators, and most of them will get the analysis and it's in a PDF. Yeah. As with damn near everything in our business. And then it just goes into documents folder to die because the actual information that they care about isn't the test. It's the analysis of the test data that has all the permeability and all the good stuff in it about the reservoir. But then that doesn't go into a database. It's not tied to any kind of GIS data. And it's like, well, that's really stupid because you do that enough times and you tie it to the GIS data. Now I can have my pore pressure map across a field without doing all that much. I just have to put this information into a database, right? Yeah. And so anyway, Kepler was originally, I think, developed by Uber for like that's their it was for huge data sets in GIS, and that's the only reason I asked. I guess y'all probably don't have a bunch of like the GIS data isn't necessarily like requiring something like that for comparative to like what Uber is, right?
No. It's that was one of the also like what you said is that's one of the reasons why we moved off of PDFs is so that we could because like if we have an up-to-date system, if we can rerun estimates like super quick, then the data could get really stale really quickly. Because one of the use cases is, hey, I'm looking to buy something. This land I'm looking to buy, or like, I want to look into this. And then if we generate that report and then like a day later, a permit comes up, then that kind of sucks. It's out of date already. So, and that's kind of why we moved over to like the subscription model and
more
like,
dynamic.
And we rerun it whenever like the model updates and stuff like that. So that was kind of like, cool. Why we kind of started moving away from PDFs altogether.
Yeah.
So,
So. My clients still want their appraisals.
Of course. No, I mean, I started working on a invoice kind of workflow company because you think land data sucks. You should see the invoicing process for all the service companies in the oil and gas industry. So I was looking at that because working at the last company Bobby and I worked at together, I realized that there's this huge problem in the rental business getting invoices approved because you have to have a stamp from the field supervisor. And if you're a rental company, most of the time when you go pick up your stuff, which is when you would get the stamp because that's when the invoice is generated, they're not there. And so now it's this huge
chase them down and
and anyway,
but
the whole premise of it was if we can just take the invoices, which are always in a PDF, and do it this way, digitize it essentially. But it's the fun. You're learning all the joys of our industry.
The industry is definitely interesting. That's for sure. So
that's the thing. There's a lot of fascinating problems, and a lot of them are really inherent just because the industry has been like the companies, the industry, the data has been created over the past 100 years, and it's very hard to implement new things with old architecture, legacy, X, Y, and Z, right? Just like the stupid land and title stuff where it's like, well, how do we digitize these handwritten records? Or there should be a database for all the deeds in every state. That makes a ton of sense.
I think probably one last thing on there, and then we'll probably get into the speed round or whatever. But so I mean, I think we've talked about the back end, and you talked about a little bit about like Mapbox, but like how are you deploying, like say like the front end of the application?
So our website is a Node application. So my background is in .NET.
Yeah.
I was a .NET programmer for the past 15 years or whatever it was, right?
I saw your Avanade, which is a big Microsoft.
Yeah,
software.
exactly. Yeah, that was the first company, and so that was my background, and like I was saying earlier, like if you're doing a startup and you want to save money, then there's so many services that you can kind of use their free tier.
Mm-hmm.
But to use a lot of those services, you really need to integrate quickly and easily to make it worthwhile.
Right.
And there's .NET Core and .NET 12, I guess it is, right? And you can do that. But there's also a lot of other niceties, especially with a one-man shop, of being able to jump back and forth between the front end and the back end, use the same language. We're using Svelte for our front end. I built 2 sites in React, and I loved it. But like Svelte is just so much easier for like small scale projects, especially things that aren't Facebook, where there's like the state management is just crazy. But like, our state management, like Svelte state management is so easy and so quick to get up and going that it just made a lot more sense to build that.
No, I mean, you hit another really good point right there, which is a lot of people, when they start looking at a new thing or they're building something or they're migrating something, they're researching, all the options out there, right? Which is, again,
it's a lot,
why we wanted to do this podcast, because it's always changing and there's so many, and most people will never know unless they use it or hear from somebody who does use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or all I hear about is React, so I think they need
right.
it.
That's what I was getting at, right? Is it's like everyone hears about Snowflake or React or Databricks, like they hear about these things, and so that's what they immediately think. It's just product placement, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what they go to. But it's, to your point, it's like, well, do you need it if you're not Facebook or Netflix, right? Like some of these things that came out of those are great tools, but they're for that type of scale. It's like Kubernetes versus Docker, right? Like, do you really need Kubernetes?
Your 80-year-old client doesn't care
exactly
what it was written in.
Day,
if I click the button, does it do what I want it to do?
Right. And React's neat. Like I had a large team doing a large React project, and like, the state management is neat, and you can do a lot of cool things with it. But like, if it's just you, and you just need the number to increase whenever you click a button. My background is like in like a knockout and stuff like that, like the old JavaScript languages like Spline and stuff like that, or was the Backbone. So like, it just made a lot more sense to like, if it's just me and if the pages are nice and simple, let's keep it nice and simple. And then also because it's nice and simple, and because Svelte, I don't know how much y'all know about Svelte, but like,
I don't know a ton. I've heard of it, but
it's doesn't have like a virtual DOM like React.
Okay.
So it's really fast. It actually, it's a JavaScript library that compiles down into just basic JavaScript.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, what you're actually deploying is HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript, like really basic JavaScript. There's no like other stuff kind of going on. And because of that, it's real easy for someone like Tracy, who doesn't have a lot of programming experience, to jump in,
right? Feel
really confident, like, oh, I need to change, like, because it looks like just HTML that she's editing. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big proponent. I love HTML and CSS. Well, CSS less, right?
Yeah.
But that's a strong statement. I'm sorry. But we use Tailwind for all of our CSS. Okay. And so she feels confident jumping in to HTML and Tailwind and being like, okay, especially with like the tools available nowadays. To make a change, feel confident and deploy it. And stuff.
So he'll set up like the templates and hey, here's how you do an info box. Here's how, here's the layout of the thing. And I'm like, okay, here's the wording we need to use instead. And then I'll fix that and change it. And
or here's the styling. Like where I don't think she would have felt as confident like jumping into React just because of how functional it is and how you can kind of go get squirrely really quick.
So. Well, and we've talked about this a number of times, but if you were born before 2000 and after probably the mid 70s, there's a very strong chance HTML just because of MySpace.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Zynga and all the stupid shit that popped off originally in the social media days, and it's like, it's crazy, but like that's why I can code now, because I've never been formally trained. I've God knows how many hours I've spent reading on it, but once you understand how to read Python or Java, like you can read most other languages, generally speaking, fairly simply. But if you can put something in a language that the SME, this is the whole point of like no code and all that, right? It's like if you can put it in the language that the SME understands, they're going to have the most power to be able to really refine it down to what the user wants because they are essentially the user that they're building for, right?
Yeah.
I actually
cool.
I actually really love no code, the no code movement, just because, especially for like startups or like small companies, I've always looked at code as a debt that the company, like as soon as you write it, it's like legacy code at that point already. Like it's just a debt on the company. Like ideally, if you could, like code doesn't make you money, it's the problems that it solves, right?
Yep.
And as long as, so the less code you can write, like if you could solve a problem with no code, you would rather. And I've always been a proponent of like making code as simple as possible and as little code as possible. So, but yeah, anyway,
I'm a huge proponent for that as well. One of my professors in undergrad worked at Lockheed, and she was in their ballistics program.
Yeah.
And I was asking her one day, like, what do y'all code? This was in the 2000s. So it was probably a very ignorant question, but I was like, what do y'all code in? And I was, I don't even know. I asked her, I don't even know what I asked her going into it at that point, but like Python or whatever. And she said most of their stuff is still coded in Fortran. And it's like, why? And she's like, well, one, obviously management, that's what they know. So, okay, get that part, especially in oil and gas, all the legacy joys. But she was like, if you can't do it in Fortran, it's not simple enough. Yeah. And like, also think about the size of a Fortran file now versus modern code, right? And it's like simplicity.
Well, and also the risk to refactor that,
right?
Like end up something as critical as a missile system. It's like,
but I became an engineer because I am right in that line with you. Is the simplest design is normally the best, and a lot of the times that is not what ends up into the marketplace.
Yeah, I remember when I got out of college, I had two options. I could either like join a company, like join Avanade and do C#, or there was another company I was looking at, and they were in Perl. And I was I don't really know anything about Perl. Let me check this out. Because I was like, UT teaches, at the time, they were teaching Java and stuff. So I looked at Perl. I was like, no, I'm good. I don't
some people that really like, they love it though. I mean, like people that were in it, like they love Perl. Like,
exactly. But
yeah, I mean, it's a dead language almost.
It's a dead language, but also like, man, you can mess it up really fast. Kind of like regex and stuff like that. It's like, don't really want to change this one. I'll just look up online how to.
And being part of the Microsoft, if you can tie into Microsoft, that's good. For your career.
Right. So. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. So
cool.
Sweet. I'm getting the
that lightning eye.
Yeah, it does.
So we end it with just like, we'll pepper you with quick random questions, fun facts. Since today is the kicking off spring break for Houston, at least, what's y'all's favorite vacation destination? Beach, snow, mountains, lake?
Probably realistically beach, but ideally mountain, but it's just we're so far from mountains.
Yeah.
So we end up going to the beach.
It's really hard to get out of Texas. So yeah. We actually have a big family trip every year down to South Padre. We rent a big house, and so we have like all of our families there and stuff.
That's great.
That's always fun.
That's awesome.
So but yeah, that's probably my favorite place, I think.
I really want to take them down to. I've never been to Padre. My family's never been down there. I really want to go.
It's the best beaches in Texas, right?
Yeah.
If you stay in Texas.
Yeah.
Then,
no, I mean we're driving 9 hours to Orange Beach, so it's like, hey, we could drive less. Hours.
A little bit. Yeah.
Maybe 6 hours.
It's like 6 hours down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here it's beautiful.
Who's your favorite social media follow?
Obviously y'all. So.
Not the real answer.
Okay, yeah.
There's a guy, I think the brand name is The Future. Chris Doe. It has just really interesting content. It's more on like being a creative and business advice for creatives, but I've found that advice has helped me a lot trying to figure out how to make a brand and expand from just consulting.
Is that LinkedIn, Twitter?
He's kind of everywhere. I mean, I kind of live on YouTube. That's kind of my universe is YouTube.
Gotcha.
And I understand that one the best. Sure. So I stay there. But yeah, they're big on YouTube and I think also LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Check it out.
On my side, I'd say like someone who's really influential early in my career was a guy named Jimmy Bogard.
Okay.
He was I think he wrote, like he convinced me to switch over to MVC, like because we were a big web forms shop, and I was like, "Oh, MVC is really neat." And I read his book that he had written way back in the day because he's up in Austin also, and he's part of the .NET user group, et cetera. And I always looked to him. And then there's a couple of people on YouTube. Lots of people on YouTube nowadays.
And for the people that want to look up MVC, it's Model View Controller, right?
Sorry,
I didn't know what it meant either.
It's an architecture,
it's kind of
old
old .NET stuff. So.
It's okay. I'm not an architect either. So I didn't. Half the time, Bobby's talking about stuff. I'm like, sure, yeah, whatever you say.
Mm-hmm.
What are some, interesting or useful kind of like libraries or things like that you've come across while building, whether it be, GIS or
open source, whatever.
Yeah, any kind of open source stuff.
You can go first.
I mean, the PostGIS extension was the game changer for me. Just being able to say like find all the wells within this distance, or all the different things that you can do geographically that I couldn't do before. I'm like, why didn't I have this when I was working for an operator? Like they could have paid for it.
Yeah, I mean, Postgres in general is just amazing. Even like now in the whole vector database thing, they're making a really strong case with PG vector. And just like I remember I had one of the guys at my coding boot camp, one of the instructors, he's like, if you can't do it in Postgres, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Westheimer.
Yeah. I'd say the big, I mentioned it already, Tailwind. I historically have always hated CSS, but man, Tailwind's so nice.
I've heard really good things about Tailwind.
It's easy to use. It does exactly kind of what you wanted to do, and it kind of fits the model of like tree. Like there's an idea in JavaScript right now called tree shakeable type stuff, where like you have all these dependencies of different files, and if a language is tree shakeable, I think React is not tree shakeable. Svelte definitely is, where it basically builds out dependency chains, and it builds like small minified files of those, of what you need, and it only serves that up to the user. And Tailwind is a lot like that, where like it, every single time you compile your project, it actually figures out what keywords, like what classes you're using, and it'll build out the CSS file that you need and nothing more. So I like the stuff like that's really neat.
That's really cool.
Yeah. That is cool. So. What was the other one that you mentioned about for deploying the?
Oh yeah, a company called Railway.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
It makes it super simple, and then like they have a whole bunch of database options. So like they have like a Redis database or like a MongoDB database. They could just be spin this up, and one of the other neat things you can do with that, which we haven't quite done yet, which I need to get you on, but like you can actually set up environmental variables like groups, and then you can from your command line connect to Railway, and basically say, hey, use this environmental variable group, and then switch between them. And then you can also spin up like, if you create a new branch in GitHub, it'll automatically spin up a new instance and change all the environmental variables if it's tied to stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And then you can
I can use it.
Nice.
Yeah. So like they have it's a developer's infrastructure piece. So it's really neat actually. So I've been really impressed.
I asked about it again because I genuinely feel like, I mean, it's tied back to the no code stuff as well, but like infrastructure and platforms as a service is a thing that is already here. It's not going anywhere. I think it's just going to make a lot of people's lives easier, where it's like, citizen data science, scientist, you can deploy an app, a database, whatever you need without having to deal with any of the YAML files or Kubernetes or any of this crazy stuff. Like Jeff Hughes.
But
we're man, that was quick. This was really good, guys. Thanks.
And again, I don't know if we hit on, but I think definitely our first sibling.
That's
true.
Glad you guys could come. Where can people find y'all? How do they get in contact with you guys?
So the company website is PecanTreeOG.com. The product website is PecanEstimate.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn and YouTube are kind of my primary platforms. So I have a YouTube channel where I'm explaining things to people. And
nice.
Definitely check out our YouTube channel. It's really good. It's like she's pretty good at explaining
I'm
things.
so close to 1,000 subscribers, like that
awesome.
Magic
All right,
1,000
make
number.
it happen, everyone.
If
it hasn't happened by the time this releases.
True.
We'll push it that way. I mean, people are, in my opinion, still sleeping on you. Like a lot of people are astonished at how much money they think Mr. Beast is worth and all these influence and stuff are. And it's like, I find myself watching more and more YouTube almost by the week or by the day.
I don't watch TV anymore.
And like,
really.
Same here.
People are absolutely sleeping on the fact that you also have now subscription,
like Patreon
attrition.
Stuff.
Right. Like I've got too much.
My best clients, and then they already know me. They already know what I do. They call up knowing what they need to know because I've already explained it to them.
Yeah. You can just describe modern marketing, which our industry knows nothing about. They don't understand.
Yeah.
But modern marketing isn't I'm going to go spend my entire marketing budget on a booth at a show and hope that the right person walks by.
Yeah.
It's modern marketing is you're the top of mind when someone thinks or needs you or your service. It's not the instant conversion. It's they come to you. It's self-service mostly. Right.
Plus also like builds like that trust too.
Yeah.
Right?
There's so many nameless, faceless companies in the oil industry,
yourself
especially.
as an expert. And
So trust is a huge thing. And that's our platform it needs to have trust.
Absolutely.
That's
big time.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate. What's your YouTube channel?
It's PecanTree OG. You can just search for my name. I think we'll also bring it up.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, this is
Appreciate
great.
it.